And welcome to another video. So today it's going to be a bit more of an educational video, just to get a few people on the ball with the 180 engine. I'm going to do it with different engines. This one's going to be about the 1.8 turbo engine. I'm going to show you the reference between the engine and the ECU, so more people kind of understand what the hell's going on with it, like when it comes to tuning and things like that, because you see a lot of crazy questions and things like that on forums. So it's time to put a lot of them to bed, give you a bit of an incline into what we expect from the 1.8 turbo engine and why we do the different things that we do with them, and to give you a bit more of an overview really. So here we go. So this is a 180 converted Mark II Golf. A lot of the bits on this make me twitch a bit because they're just stuff you don't do, but I'm going to get through them, fix them, get it all sorted, get on the dyno, tune it up. But that's not going to be today. Today all I want to do is focus on the engine itself, what we're looking at is when you're tuning them and things like that, what all the sensors mean, how the sensors reference in the map, what is the ECU, you know, what do we do with the ECU and things like that. It's all the bits that people have not a little understanding about. Seems to be a little bit of a black art and things like that, but it's not that hard really once you've done a few and understand it a bit more. It kind of like differs from car to car and things like that, but for this is just about the 180, so this is what we're going to look at. So first of all, ECU controls that. So everything to do with the engine is what the ECU deals with. So that's why they call it the engine control unit. So things like your lights, shit like that, it doesn't care about any of that. It doesn't even know what they are. All the inputs are from the loom itself, so it all goes back to the ECU. Guessing the ECU looks like it's over there, a bit wet. Parts of this car are a bit iffy, but it's what I've got here. I've got another one over there, but this is the obvious one, the easiest one. So on this one, it's running the ME7 ECU, so it's the later ECU. So it's the 2001 to like 2007, I think they stopped making this. And then they went over to, obviously, the TFSI engine with the Med9 ECU. So this one runs the ME7 ECU. It's one of the first ECUs a lot of people learn when they start looking into the 1.8, or start looking into tuning really, when tuning petrols, because it's kind of like the mother of the next generations of ECUs. So it's where, if you can figure this out, you can pick points of the other ECUs to get you further into them ECUs, just put a few more bits together to understand those. So first of all, we've got sensors. So you have sensors like the MAF sensor. Now the MAF sensor is reading the air through the intake, which is a bit dirty on here, not great, through the intake into the turbo, round the turbo compresses the air comes round into the intercooler, all the air gets cooled down, well you'd hope, gets cooled down in here, comes back round. You've got another sensor here which measures the pressure coming through this pipe into the intake, split into 4 chambers, into the cylinders of the engine. After adding, obviously you've got the ECU which then controls the fuel, so it knows how much fuel to add, which again is controlled by the ECU. The ECU knows how big these injectors are. The ECU knows how much pressure, which again, don't like these, but it's another one. It's got this adjustable regulator for the fuel pressure, so it understands the size of these by what pressure you're using. So this really isn't adjustable ECU wise. You have to adjust them in the ECU itself. So the adjustable regulators are a bit poo. But still, you've got that there. So you've got the adjustable regulator for the pressure for these injectors, and the injectors are rated by the pressure. So if you've got 550cc injectors, they are 550cc at 3 bar pressure. If you run it at 4 bar, it actually ups the size of the injectors to around 630cc. So these are very, you know, and the size of these are done in the ECU itself. So it's not really something you should be adjusting without knowing how to adjust it in the ECU to make up for it. Okay, so air and fuel goes into the cylinders, and then you've got obviously the coil packs and the spark plugs, which again are controlled in the ECU. You've got a dwell time for the coil packs, and on the spark plugs themselves, you've got what we call timing. So timing to an ECU isn't the crankshaft and the cam timing; it's the physical spark on these spark plugs. So all of that is controlled. So obviously to reach maximum best torque, we use the timing to reach that, but these engines don't reach maximum best torque on normal fuel because it's what we call knock limited. So obviously you're going to reach the point of detonation before you reach maximum best torque, which is where we start adding things like meth, different fuels and things like that, so we can make the best power that's available on the engine without running into knock. Now, knock and things like that I'll explain in another video, but we'll carry on. So when you're tuning these, everything is in the ECU. So you can log what the MAF is reading, you can log what the map is reading, you can log what the lambda sensor is reading, you can see well, you can't log the timing, but you can see if you're getting detonation, so you know how much to pull away. So all of that is controlled in the ECU, which is, and so when you start changing things, obviously you have to start changing things in the ECU to make up for it. So if I add, well, to be fair, some things don't really matter as much. So like here he's added all the intake, well, sorry, the intake, he's got all the charge pipes, it's got an intercooler and all that kind of stuff, but all that isn't really adjustable really. It helps the whole thing, because that engine is basically just an air pump. So it sucks air in, it compresses it to make up, like the turbocharger makes up for the loss of efficiency, so you can raise the boost, add more air into the engine, more compressed air, which means I can add more fuel to make more power. It's pretty much how it works. But there's no point, like, because I've had a few questions in the past where people are like, what size injectors do I need? I've fitted 630cc injectors to a KO3S turbo, and think that there's no need for that, because you're not going to, like, the injectors themselves are not going to make you any power. All they do is allow you to make power if the turbo is supplying the air, so I can get obviously, so you can add enough fuel to burn that air. There's an air fuel ratio and all that kind of stuff. So there's no point in just adding big injectors thinking that you're going to make more power. Okay, so that is one thing I need to get signed off. So we'll get into more of that anyway. We'll break this video into different sections and get into the different parts of the engine to understand it. Now, things, if you own a 180, to make things better for yourself, for future, for things like that, it's things like deleting, well, not deleting, but running catch cans, because that's a catch can now, you've just got it running down there. Because all these do is simplify the breathing system. Because if you get, well, on a stock car, there's a pipe down there, which is a crankcase breather, which comes up to here, and then it joins onto the camshaft head, cam cover breather. And then that then goes into the intake tip, which has got a puck on it, it's called a PCV. Now, because it's going back into the engine, and it's got an in and an out basically, if you've got any leak here, it can affect your fuel trims. Because obviously the car's fueling by MAF. It can adjust by the wideband, but the wideband's after everything has happened. So you find it waving and fighting and going backwards and forwards. So to cure that, or to make sure we don't get that in the future, what we normally do is run a pipe off the crankcase into a T-piece, off the cam cover, into a catch can, and then block off the intake. Because then if you get any leaks here, it doesn't matter. You can run that into open air if you wanted to. It wouldn't matter because you've blocked off the intake tip. Okay, so that's always one good thing we do with that. But anyway, back into the tuning side. So when we're tuning these, and we want to make more power and things like that, obviously we start with a stock engine. So we start with the stock turbo, stock injectors, all that jazz, and then we push it as hard as we can on the stock setup to understand it, so we know where we are with it. Right, we can make 220 brake at 1.5 bar, blah blah blah. Things that stop us are intake temps, or not enough air breathing in, or whatever, or the downpipe decats choking it, or you can see all these things as you start tuning them. So when we call something a stage, that's a stage one. So you've got stock engine, there's nothing on it, we know what we can make on the stock engine, yada yada yada. Okay, but when we look at the next stage, say like stage 2, this is where the stages come into it, because ECU wise, okay, there is no stages to the ECU. There's no, there is in terms of how we sell it and what hardware you need, but actual ECU wise, I have no limitations. I can adjust that to do whatever I want. If I want 850cc injectors, I can make it run 850cc injectors. If I want to chuck a GTX 30 on it, I can make it run a GTX 30. Okay, the ECU itself has no limitations. The limitations are here. So it's always to do with the hardware of the engine. I can only make what power this allows me to, okay? There's no magic to the ECU to make this run more power than what it physically can run. So when we call stages, it's basically the hardware. So we're saying if you want stage 2 power, which is like to give people an idea of how to build the engine for the different levels of power and what actually restricts the engine. Because if we didn't do that, you'd just be fitting random stuff and you might not make any more power than a stage 1 because you've missed a downpipe, or you've missed this, or you've missed that. So we simplify it by saying, right, stage 2, decat and intake. And then we charge a stage 2 session because you've now running less inefficiency on the engine. So you've took the decat off, you put a decat on, so you've released a bit of back pressure. You've put an intake on, so you're now breathing in more air, so there's now more available to the engine. What you find is you spend a little bit more time tuning it because you're kind of like detuning a little bit just to get it to run as strong as you can by what you've got. But even then, you're going to be restricted by the intake temps. So intercooler comes into play, you've got more power, which is why to me a stage 2 is everything. So everything you need on stock injectors and stock turbo, that to me is stage 2. So there's obviously different ways of doing it, different people do it different ways, and things like that. So there's always things to watch. And then other things, one annoying thing as a tuner is obviously joins on pipes. I hate joins on pipes. The more joins you got, the more chance you're going to have of a boost leak. So when you've got a Jubilee, so you've got a join pipe. This is a stock pipe. It's steel, it's going to get hot as well, and obviously it's going to get hot the manifold, so that's going to restrict you a little bit. Then you've got obviously another join for the, don't even know what reset that is, but it's got a reset on it. And then you've got another join, so you've got join, another 2 places that you can get a boost leak, or can pop off. It comes round, join, another place you can get a boost leak, can pop off. Comes down here, join, pipe, join. So 3 joins, they're close together, join. All you really need is a silicone pipe on the main part there to the pipe. That then should be a solid pipe round to a join here, and a join onto the, obviously another silicone pipe onto that, just to give you some movement, because this engine is going to move. But if you've bracketed that isn't going to move. So if you don't have a silicone pipe on things like that, it's going to break, it can't move. So then it comes through here, you should have another silicone pipe again for the same reason, onto a pipe, and then that could literally be a straight pipe round just to join there again, because you get movement. So things like that, obviously be wary of. Build your engines properly, minimum joins, and don't go too fat on the pipe and don't go too small on the pipe, and it's just things like that really. So this is obviously the 180. So now tuning wise, you've got monetary sensors, which are obviously the MAF, which is monitoring the level, or the measure of air going through. This MAF, the sensor doesn't even come into it. The sensor's it's got a hot wire on it which gets cold. Well, sorry, the amount of air going over the hot wire changes the temperature on the sensor, on the hot wire, which the sensor then tells the ECU how much air is going through the MAF by its size. So the important thing on a MAF is the inner diameter of that pipe. That's the only bit the ECU can see, which is the curve, which I'll just go over to now, so you can see that. That is the curve, that is how it works. It's got literally 0 volt to 5 volt, and on that 0 to 5 volt, the ECU knows how much air mass is travelling through that tube by the voltage that sensor is telling the ECU that it's running at. Okay, so that's the MAF. Then you have the boost. So this is called the N75 valve. This works pretty simple. You've got you have 3 ends on this N75 valve. You've got a long end, which is into the tip, which is like a breather. It doesn't have to go into the tip, but obviously it's more air, so we use it. So you've got the long end which goes into the tip. You've got the one on the side, which is the feed. It should be this one here, which goes onto your charge pipe. So that's your feed, that's positive pressure in there, so that's your feed. And then you've got the one opposite the long end, I call it, opposite the breather, which goes to the actuator. Now the ECU controls this valve by what we tell it. Again, everything is calibrated by size. So this actuator down here is a known size for the ECU. So if that's running 10 psi, 14 psi, 7 psi or whatever else, you have to adjust the duty in the ECU to adjust for the size of that actuator. Now obviously these actuators wear over time, which is why they've got a threaded bar, and we can add preload onto the actuator to obviously give it a bit more kick. Right then, so this is the map itself in all its glory. This is a 1.8 turbo binary file from an ECU, from an ME7. This one being the KO3S model, so a AUM AEQ. So as I said, everything that you have in the engine is also, well, is in the ECU. So we basically use those sensors on the engine to tune and optimize the engine via the ECU, because that's where everything is calibrated and things like that. So let me give you an example. So we've got a MAF housing, and the MAF housing is now a different size. So we say we switch from a KO3 MAF housing to a bar MAF housing. We would have to come over to the MAF scaling, which is this table here, and we would have to tell the ECU what the difference is in the size of the volume of air between 0 volt and 5 volt. This is pretty much a nice curve, so it's pretty much a case of finding the two and then interpolating the rest, but it is that kind of simple, but that kind of, you have to do it, because the problem is if you don't tell the ECU that you've changed that MAF size, your MAF or your ECU will be calculating air based on the air going through the MAF tube, cooling down that wire and giving incorrect signals to the ECU, because obviously there's more air travelling over the wire, giving a different fuel by the time it gets to the engine. And your engine won't correct for that until it gets to the lambda sensor, which is on the end of all of the intake, or everything that's happened basically. So once your fuel has left your engine burnt, it's then calculated, well, measured, shall I say, in the lambda sensor, which is then fed back to the ECU, which then the ECU will adjust the fuel trims to make up for the in this case it will probably be a lean mix. So which is what pretty much happens. So everything in your ECU is calculated in here. It's in the map. So when we're going about remapping and things like that, this is what we're on about. A remap is pretty much recalibrating the ECU to work with the engine with whatever you put on it. So again, if we say we're changing the injectors, if I come over here and put this ID number in, this is the ID number for basically the ECU's way of knowing what the injector size is. So again, conversion relative fuel mass, RK, and effective injection time. So this basically gives the ECU the injection time for a certain amount, for a size, if that makes sense. And the size is calculated via pressure too. So as I said before, with the injectors, the 550cc injectors is 550cc's at 3 bar pressure. You change that to 4 bar and you bump it up, I think it's about 15 to 17%, but you'll be on around 630cc's, but you've still got 550cc injectors. So obviously the pressure matters just as much as the size. So if you get an adjustable fuel regulator and you start tweaking it around a bit, you're going to throw the ECU out and it's not going to know where it is. It's always going to be second guessing itself, which is not what we want. We want to calculate everything in the ECU and calibrate it, so the point where it doesn't have to second guess itself. It knows what air's going in, it knows what fuel's going in, it knows how much duty it needs for boost. Let's go over to that one now. So you've got your N75 valve, and in the ECU there's a couple of maps, but the main one we're going to use for this example is the boost pressure map. Now what this basically does, it's like a feed forward map to tell the ECU what duty, so how much air to pass through that N75 valve to get to the boost levels and to maintain the boost levels that we are requested in the ECU. So if we're requesting, say, 20 psi, then we would have to calibrate the ECU. First we'd have to request a load, which the load is worked out from the MAF, etc. So we have to calculate the load which we need to request. So we do that, and then to control that boost, we would use this table to make sure that the the ECU has got enough duty cycle to reach the pressures that we want to reach, which will be opening and closing that N75 valve. Some people fit the boost controllers, so you take out the electric boost controller which the ECU controls, and now fit a manual boost controller, which is okay, but it's a bit you know, a bit sketchy. And if the ECU isn't requesting the load that you're trying to request with that manual boost controller, you'll hit a wall and it will fuel cut, and you'll be in all sorts of bother, and you won't be able to run that level of power because, again, the ECU is calibrated to run a certain level of fuel based on the boost, based on the timing and everything else. It's all things, it all goes together. So this map is part of a system. We call it the PID, it's like a PID control. I'll get into that into a later video. It's quite intense, but it's basically part of the PID system which controls the boost. So if you fit, say, an intercooler, charge pipes and things like that, or decat and whatever else, it kind of throws this map out a little bit, because you're releasing a lot of that efficiency. So whereas this map is set against the efficiency, it's trying to make the boost against the inefficiencies from the decat and the charge pipes and things like that. So when you start removing those, this map kind of gets a bit out, because all those inefficiencies are now gone. So it'll overboost on the boost. So you kind of get that wavy feel. So when you see dyno graphs and things like that where the boost looks like it's waving, that's pretty much what's going on. It's because the ECU is using this map to get to the pressure that it expects at whatever throttle position or however it's set up, and then it'll overshoot, and then so the ECU is like, oh, I'm overshooting, so then it'll pull it back because it'll use the PID system, and then it pulls it back to the point where it drops below the line, then it'll add it back on again, because then it's gone underneath and it panics again. So you get that effect where the ECU is pulling and pushing. Basically, it's opening and closing that N75 valve to try and maintain the boost pressure, but because this is so far out, it can't preempt what's going to happen. You have to tell it what's going to happen, and if what you tell it is out, then the car isn't going to do what you tell it to do. Then you start getting problems, get underboost, overboost. It could be that bad that you drop into limp mode because the ECU is beyond the level of its control, and such forth. So, but this, you have to remember, is also set to the stock actuator pressure. So 10% is a certain boost, and such, 95% is the max out on that actuator that would fall there. So if you then go and change that actuator to double the size, so you're now running 14 psi actuator, all these really need to be halved, because you're doubling the size of the actuator, so you should be halving the amount of pressure you have to put against the actuator to maintain the boost that you want to maintain. So again, you have to come into the ECU, you have to change the calibration, and all that will depend on whoever's doing the tune and their level of expertise and experience, because there's not many people out there who do their own tunes and things like that. So if you're going to start changing hardware, just keep an eye on things like your boost and things like that, because you can blow rods, you can do all sorts of damage by not calibrating these maps properly. So that's those maps. What else do we have? We have the map sensor, which goes into these. We have the lambda, which we have another map for, so we can preempt that based on full throttle. Let's come back over here. Can search it if I need to. Can't always find the tables I want. Where are you? Probably gone to. I've gone too far. Let's have a look. Around here somewhere. Here we go. So this table here is what we call LAMFA. So basically you get ID names, and these ID names are used by the manufacturer. This is what we call a Deimos file, which I'll put over the top of a binary file to make sense of it. So it puts them all into nice little maps. So this is called the Lambda's driver's wish. So basically this is the map which the ECU uses to preempt what fuel it wants to reach. So if based on the calibration for the injector size and the oil pressure, it could then control itself around these values. So if I ask this to be richer at, say, 3k, because I've got a bigger turbo on it, so I change this to 0.83, and then I'll just level it out a little bit. So say if I've done this, and I've now told the ECU I want it to run 0.8 lambda, 0.82 lambda at a certain point, for you that use AFR, you can times lambda by 14.7 and it'll give you your AFR. I'll just have a look at that now if I can get a calculator. So we've got 0.82 times that by 14.7 and it gives you an AFR of 12. So that's how you quickly work out AFR if you need to. Those offsets you can put in here to turn it into AFR too if you prefer that. But anyway, so if your ECU is calibrated properly, you could literally tell the ECU what you want in this table, and it will know by what maths you've put into the ECU via the other little bytes, like the one I showed you for the injector size. It'll know how long it has to keep those injectors open to make a certain level of fuel in the cylinder. It'll know when to open it, when to close it, and such. And you get an injection window. So if you start getting to the end of your window to the point that it can't reach these numbers, that's when you start leaning out and you need to either fit bigger injectors or maybe your pumps wear in or all those kind of things. But in this, the ECU has what we call fuel trims. Those fuel trims are maintained by the wideband sensor and the ECU. So that sensor feeds back to the ECU and tells the ECU what the fuel it is at currently. Then the ECU looks at that number, looks at this number in the table, and then it's got the power to adjust by a certain percentage, which is 25% either way, of how much fuel it needs to add or take away to maintain these numbers. So it can wave, it can do all sorts. Obviously, ideally, we want it to hit this number and literally sit there until we want it to change, because then we have full control over the fuel system. So this is part of why we need to change things. So when you've got, say if you've got a set of 300cc injectors and then you change them to a set of 500cc injectors, your car's going to get very rich before the ECU can get anywhere near these numbers because it's preempted. So it's thought that you got these 300cc injectors, they're set up for these 300 injectors, so it dumps so much fuel in, but then it goes past the lambda and is like, whoa, I'm running rich. So the ECU then pulls, using the fuel trims, it'll pull fuel out to try and get back to these numbers. But by then it's kind of a little bit too late because of how fast, it goes through the table and things like that. So you end up with just like the bush, you end up waving around a lot where the car doesn't really know what it's doing. So the whole idea is we can add request in here, we can set the set your injectors timing up and everything else. Then we can come in this table and just fine tune the injectors at different parts of the map to set them up. So there's a lot involved when it comes to changing parts on the engine. Like stage 1 tunes, not really much involved. You pretty much set up, you don't have to set up injectors, you'd have to set up turbos, you have to set up actuators, you have to set up for different coolers, for decats and things like that. So the stage 1 becomes, your first level. So most people can, supply a half decent first level, stage 1. It's when you start changing things that it gets beyond people. So if you start changing your MAF and you start changing injectors, you start changing turbo, they need to know exactly which maps to come into in these ECUs to set them up, which is pretty much what it comes down to. So that is what we call tuning. This is, we use all the sensors in your engine to produce the power and the control that we expect the ECU to do. Because the ECU, as I said before, is only controlling that engine. So when we're flashing it and you say your lights don't work or your dash don't work or your radio don't work, it's got nothing to do with the flashing of the ECU. That's just something else which, part of the wiring or whatever else you might have messed with in the meantime. So, hope that kind of opened your eyes a little bit to what's involved when you take your car to get an ECU tuned. Or you take your car to get your engine tuned via the ECU. And what's involved when you start changing parts, and why we call things in stages, because obviously we don't have to call things in stages. We could pretty much just sit your car in the dyno, take notes of what you fitted it, set that up, give you back 10 extra brakes. Here you go, here's your car back. I'll set up what you've put on it. You've still got a cat on it, can't get any more power out of it. Done your bike. Is pay your money and off you go. Where in reality, what we really want to be doing is saying, you fit these parts and we can give you this HP goal. So we do that using the stage level, because then we don't have to keep going through it. You don't get multiple parts on engines, because when you start chucking different things at engines, so say like the 180 is kind of like this now. So if you've got a setup, so you're running a hybrid turbo or a certain hybrid turbo like a K300 or something like that, we've already done the work for this turbo. So we've had the cars in, we've done the work, we understand what makes power, what doesn't make power. we understand the limits and everything else. So we would spec you for that turbo. So we would say, right, the K300 is best with a ported manifold done by such and such, because home porting doesn't always work. Then we'll say you pair this with a set of 550cc injectors, because they're better than a 440s, because a lot of the 440s are copies, and 550 seem to be more readily available. But they also give you plenty of room on the K300. They can do it to about 350, 400 or so. The 300 brake that the K300, it's got it easy. And then we'll say, obviously, if you've got an older setup, then change your pump, fit a bigger MAF because you're reading more air, and such, and then spec you with intercooler pipes, downpipe, and all that kind of stuff, just to get you near your goal. So if you want a 300 brake goal and you've got the K300, we can spec you to that build. But also, when you bring it on the day, we can tune that car within a couple of hours, because we've done that setup already. If you start putting different injectors on, like someone comes in with 630 CT deckers, which you might not have done on that setup, and such, then it becomes a longer process. So then you might not get your car back in the day. And you know, not everyone has got emulators, which speeds things up. Like for me, I can tune them live. I don't have to tune the car, and I tune it as I go. Like I can log and adjust at the same time. So it's just really fast for me. But for other people, that isn't possible. So it's always good to talk with your tuner, to contact your tuner, to find out, you know, what he expects for the different levels and things like that. And don't kind of mock the stage level as much, because it's there for a purpose. That purpose is to save you money, to make sure you get to the level you want, and in the time frame that is possible. Because obviously you start changing stuff, we've got to start changing stuff. If you change different injectors that we don't quite understand, and then we tune it to what we can see on the dyno, down the road it drives different, then it's more work. There's a lot to it, a lot more to it than I think people realise, because of how tuning has been marketed and things like that. So if you want to learn more about obviously tuning 180s in a bit more in depth, and you want to learn about the maps or whatever else, you can head over to my website, which is thetuningworkshop.com, and on there you will find there's tutorials on how to tune this ECU and other ECUs too, and I'm always adding into it and doing things like that as well. The next level Med 9's on there, the one before this with them 3.8's on there. So they're all good videos to go into. So if you want to get into them, please head over there. I'll try and do as many videos like this as I can, because I can see that you guys are preferring the educational videos, so I can keep hammering these out and getting you guys up to speed with stuff. If you've got any questions, drop me an email. All my stuff's in my Facebook bits. Facebook, Instagram, I use them all, or I've got Gmail, I'm on there too. So if you've got any questions, or you want me to go over something or anything else, just drop into my inbox, and I can answer the questions. But bear in mind, I am busy. I'm doing cars every day. Practically live on the dyno, so it's, you know, sometimes it takes me a while to come back to people, so just bear that in mind. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, follow the channel, keep up with me. The more you follow me and comment, the more I can crack on with it and make more time to be doing it. So thanks guys, have a good night.